So I was supposed to do this a couple of days ago. I was actually supposed to do this on Wednesday because the Chicago Fire was officially eliminated on Wednesday. But because of the fact that I didn't realize they were up for elimination doing that midweek game against NYCFC, and the fact that I actually didn't realize that the Chicago Fire were playing this Wednesday, that is the reason why I had to kind of like delay this and finally do this on Saturday. But without further ado, let's talk about the Fire, who has been officially eliminated this season. I'm going to be talking about what went wrong, what went right, and of course, moving forward, what are they going to do to fix the problem that they have so far this season, which there is a lot of problem for the Chicago Fire. I mean, from top to bottom, there is just many problem of why the Fire, who a year ago were in the playoffs, and now they just basically fell apart and pretty much look like the Chicago Fire team from the past couple of seasons, which is always constantly missing the playoffs. But for the Fire, what's interesting about the Fire also is that they're actually not dead last in the Eastern Conference. Orlando City is actually dead last right now in the Eastern Conference with 25 points. But the reason why Orlando City hasn't been officially eliminated is because Orlando City does have a game in hand over the Chicago Fire. And speaking of Orlando City, if they lose or draw this weekend, I think they will officially be eliminated from the playoffs, and they will be the next team that will feature in my moving forward series. Although I know that there's also 4 teams this weekend that is up for elimination, so there's going to be a couple of moving forward series episode potentially made this weekend. Depends on how many clubs will officially be eliminated from playoff contention. But going back with the Chicago Fire, they of course become the first team to be eliminated in the Eastern Conference, the 3rd team to be eliminated from the playoffs this season. Their record as of now is 7 wins, 7 draw, and 16 losses. They have 28 points. They have scored 43 goals, allowed 56, and have a goal differential of minus 13. So obviously, there is some issue with the defense, with the fact that they concede 56 goals this season. I mean, any times when you concede 50 goals or more, or I think this season the benchmark should be at 55 because there's a lot of goals scoring in this season. I think there's been more goals that we have seen this season than any other season we had in MLS, because there's been just so many weeks where we had so many high scoring actions. So that's why I think maybe the benchmark in terms of just when you can see this amount of goal and above this kind of goal scoring or goal allowed mark, then you're having some problem with the defense. And I think this year should be at 55, and because the Fire are above that 55 mark, then yeah, there obviously is some issue with their defense. And I also heard that they actually release a couple of players during the mid-season and release a couple of defender just to sort out that kind of defense that has just not looked good whatsoever this season. But in terms of the top goal scorer so far for them, not surprisingly, Nemanja Nikolic with 14 goals. He hasn't scored as much goals as he has last season in his Golden Boot kind of winner season when he scored 24 goals, but still, this is still a very decent season for Nikolic, and considering the fact that he is on a team that is not very good, it's quite impressive that Nikolic is still able to retain his goal scoring form, and he's been one of the big part of the Chicago Fire's attacking force on this team. And then after that, you got Alexander Katai with 11 goals, which I will also talk about what actually went right for the Fire. And this is actually one of the things that went right for the Fire this season, of the impact that Katai has put in this team. But after that, you got Schweinsteiger, good old Alan Gordon, and Kevin Ellis with 2 goals. Gordon and Schweinsteiger with 4 each. And again, Kevin Ellis, He's no longer with the Chicago Fire. I think he's now with DC United. After a couple of months ago, they released him. In terms of the top assist leader, you got Schweinsteiger with 6, not surprisingly. Then you got Ellis, Katai, Brent Bronco, I think that's how you pronounce his name, and Johan Kappenhoff with 4 goals apiece. And in terms of what went wrong for the Chicago Fire this season, well, injuries was one of the reasons that kind of, I wouldn't say completely impact the Fire season, but it definitely took a big toll early part of the season. I mean, early part of the season, the Chicago Fire were suffering from so many injuries. Like, they were one of the most injury-riddled team of the early part of the season, and I think when they started to finally get some of those key guys back from injuries, you can see that they started to do much better. But the reason why I don't say that is really one of the main reason why this Fire has just had a horrible season is because I want to also talk about this part. They fell apart after July, and this had nothing to do with injuries, but it's just straight out, they just fall apart. Like, this team was in the thick of potentially making the playoffs, and I think even back in June I said that this is a team that is in a very good spot of making the playoffs with the way that they are playing. And then all of a sudden, when that calendar month hit July, they just went off of cliff. I mean, they had a stretch where they lost 8 in a row. Yeah, 8 games in a row that they have lost, and it's not like 8 games in a row that they were winless. It was 8 games in a row that they lost, and they just completely fell down to the bottom of the Eastern Conference, and it was getting so dire that you were thinking that what actually happened to the Fire. Like, they were having a pretty kind of decent kind of season. I mean, they were definitely not having as good as a season as last season that they made the playoffs, but that, of course, a lot to do with David Accam no longer being with this team. But you would think that this team could maybe sneak in to the playoffs, and then they just kind of fall apart after July. Another issue that they had in this season, and this is probably one of the biggest issue and maybe kind of explain why they fell apart after July, is this goalkeeping issue. I mean, this is a thing that whenever the Fire lose a game, everybody says that the reason why the Fire lose this game is because of goalkeeping issue. I mean, Richard Sanchez this season, the starting goalkeeper for the Fire, has been absolutely dreadful. I mean, there's been so many times this season he has let in some soft goals. Kind of like similar to what Tarbell has been doing for the Quakes, of just leaking kind of some soft goals, and should have saved a couple of shots that is very savable. And also, there's been a couple of games that he just downright cost the Fire a couple of points, which also kind of sound familiar of how Tarbell does, and also what the Quakes are dealing throughout this season. But yeah, goalkeeping has been just a big issue for the Chicago Fire, and it just got so bad that they actually had to bench Richard Sanchez and put in their reserve goalkeeper to kind of fix this issue. I mean, yeah, that is another thing that I will also later talk about, how they definitely need to find a new goalkeeper. And then, of course, the final thing that went wrong this season, and actually, before I talk about this, another thing that I think they also kind of went wrong this season is that they play Schweinsteiger as a sweeper for a majority part of the season. Like, I don't know why in the world did they decide to do that. I mean, maybe injuries play a little part of that, but for majority part of the season, they play Schweinsteiger as a sweeper kind of defender, and he just not that kind of player. He's not a sweeper kind of player, and yet they still keep playing him game after game after game, and it's also no wonder why Bastian Schweinsteiger has not had a good season, and that, I know some people will say, well, maybe he is started to be a little bit washed up, but at the same time, you cannot have just an amazing season like he has last season to just having an absolute awful season like that. I mean, for a guy that is one of the best player in the world, and even though, like I said, gets a little bit older as times go, he shouldn't be having that kind of big decline, and it has to be something that the team has done that just made him look really kind of bad this season, and that is pretty much the reason. They play him in a position that he is not familiar with and is a position that he does not want to play in. But heading into the final things that I want to talk about, that what went wrong for the Fire, is ownership. And I know that the fans have been tired of the ownership that the Chicago Fire are in, and it's not surprising that the fans are not happy with the ownership. This has happened for a lot of club that is not doing very well this season. But another thing that is interesting about this team is that they actually clash with the fans throughout the season. I think a couple of months ago, and I think back in June, they actually banned the supporter group from attending games because they violate a fan conduct. Now, I'm not sure what exactly is the fan conduct that they violated, though, but there was another incident in July where they actually just banned the supporter group for the rest of the season, and even close off a section of the stadium because these supporter group that originally was banned from sitting in that section decided to sit in this section either way, and decided to continue to cheer and continue to protest the club, and the club basically just decided to kind of ban them for the rest of the season because they violated the rule of them just not being able to sit in that section. And there's just been a lot of problems that the Fire has gone throughout this season. And when you have off the field issue but not involved with the players but involved with the fans as one of the big problem throughout this season, yeah, your club is definitely in a crisis. And right now, when you look at the attendance issue for the Fire, I remember there was one game, and this was, I think, against the Columbus Crew, where there was only like 6,000 fans showed up. And when you look at the stadium, it didn't even look like there was 6,000 fans that actually showed up at a game. And yeah, I mean, that has to be a huge issue with this team. And I know the Fire hasn't been the best in terms of drawing fans to the stadium, but I think part of that is because the ownership group that is just really bad and decided to build a stadium that is like 16 miles west of or southwest of Chicago, and just built on like a suburb area. And I also have heard a lot of Fire fans complain that it is incredibly hard to get to the stadium. So, from what went wrong this season to now talk about what went right for the Chicago Fire. And what went right for them, like I said earlier, is the Katai impact, and how there's been a lot of question earlier in the season of how will they replace David Accam, and will Alexander Katai could be a player that can at least have at least kind of a half of the impact that Accam had with this team last season. Well, not only he kind of have half of what Accam did last season for the Fire, he's been pretty much kind of like another David Accam. Although, unlike David Accam, where he's kind of like a pacey kind of player and he can like dribble, take on a couple of defender, Katai is just a very kind of lethal finisher. I mean, 11 goals this season, and some of the goals that he scored this season are just out of the world, are just goal of the year kind of candidate. And he also has made a couple of impact in some of the games too. I remember the Red Bulls game where the Fire was on the road, and nobody expected to get a win, except Alexander Katai just scored an absolute worldie to give them the lead, and it turns out the Fire was able to walk out of Red Bull Arena, and one of the few teams that walk out of Red Bull Arena with all 3 points. And that's just one incident that he has made impact to this team. And although I know that Katai hasn't really been like a calm where he really just single-handedly helped the Chicago Fire, this is a guy that from the beginning of the season, we had no idea who exactly he is, and there was a lot of unknown quality to becoming now one of the biggest impact for this team. And this is certainly a good building piece alongside with Nemanja Nikolic that they can use for next season when they try to rebuild the team, trying to get them back to where they were a seasons ago. And the other thing that went right for the Fire this season, and kind of talking about the Katai kind of impact and talk about David Accam, is that they got the trade right with David Accam. And I know as painful it was for them to trade David Accam to the Union, and how that is a really big blow to the Chicago Fire. You see what David Accam is doing with the Union, which is he is not making any sort of impact with the Union whatsoever. And the fact that they were able to get like 1.4 or 1.5 million out of David Accam, yeah, they just got a lot of money. And I hope that money they could use to potentially spend on a couple of defenders that they have, which again, this is part of what I'm going to get to when we talk about moving forward. But yeah, they definitely got that trade right, despite the fact that they did lose a huge piece in their team. And the other thing that went right for this season, and I'm not quite sure it's really part of went right, but one of the highlight of their season is that they get to play Bayern at Munich. They get to play Bayern Munich at the Allianz Arena because of the tribute game that Schweinsteiger received. And Schweinsteiger was also able to score a goal, albeit it was against the Chicago Fire, and that Bastian Schweinsteiger wasn't actually playing for the Fire in that game, but he was actually playing with his old team Bayern for that game. So I guess that is pretty much one of the highlights, I would say. I don't know if it actually fits in what went right for this season. And then, of course, moving forward for this team, obviously the question is, are they going to get a new ownership? There's been no news that the ownership is going to like sell the teams, and no news that there's going to be some shuffling going on in the front office, but you would think the fans are praying for a new ownership. And the other thing is, are they going to get a new manager? And I know there's also has not been any news that Veljko Paunovic is going to potentially get fired, and he's not going to be like one of those managers this season that just gets sacked on Monday morning. But when you look at the coaching field right now and the potential coach that you can hire, you know, there's a long list of good kind of coaches that is in this vacant spot, and you wonder, will the Fire decide to kind of risk it and try to, you know, I don't think Paunovic is a bad kind of manager, and I think if what he done last season to what happened this season partially is not kind of his fault because of the injuries that he has. And you know, when you have injuries, usually that is very kind of hard to manage. But you wonder, would the Fire potentially get rid of Paunovic and maybe search in one of those vacant kind of coaching spot, and how it's just those kind of coaching spot are looking very promising for someone to hire, and maybe they'll look into that. Another thing is that they need a new goalkeeper, as I mentioned before, of what went wrong this season. And also they need probably sign a couple of defender and maybe a couple of midfielder too, because again, their defense concede a lot of goals, and also the midfield is not really kind of create. Their midfield, I think, you know, I this is another thing that I also want to add into the what went wrong this season, is that I want to say what exactly happened to Dax McCarty. Like, it feels like this season we have really not kind of mentioned exactly what happened to Dax McCarty. I mean, I've been looking all over the news, and there was not a single mention with Dax McCarty. Now, maybe he's actually injured, or the fact that maybe he's not making a big impact, but something must have gone wrong with Dax McCarty. I mean, he was one of the big pieces for this Fire team last season in the midfield, and now this season he's not even getting mentioned. And the only positive thing I would say is that he's either getting injured or the fact that he is having an absolute awful year. But that could be another thing that, that could be a thing that the Fire might think about, is that will they potentially get rid of Dax McCarty, because McCarty is getting old too. I think he's now 32 years old, and the older he gets, the less impact that he is gonna be for this team. So that could be another interesting thing that they might think about. And also, probably another thing that I left out in the moving forward is what are they gonna do with Bastian Schweinsteiger, because Bastian Schweinsteiger is out of contract this year. Are they gonna think about renewing his contract? And Schweinsteiger, I think he's 35 or 34 right now, and you can see at part of this season that he's kind of started to run out of gas, and that he's kind of a little bit washed up a little bit. Will the Fire think about keeping him for another year or two? And as of now, I haven't heard any kind of talk of them potentially extending the contract, but just keep in mind that if they don't sign a contract to Schweinsteiger, he would be gone this season. He's out of contract this season. So yeah, that of course is pretty much it for the Moving Forward series for the Chicago Fire. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of it? And if you're a Chicago Fire fan, you can tell me what I said wrong about this team and what I said right about this team, because I'm not an expert on this team. I don't actually support the Chicago Fire. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.